So first things first, Gizelle, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm alright, thank you.
Good.
So before we get into the record, I'd like to go into something else. I read somewhere that you were learning to play the bass.
Yeah, I am.
How are you faring?
I'm doing really well, actually. So Joe, actually, my boyfriend, bought me a bass for Christmas. So I've been learning since Christmas. But I'm kind of, because when I take on a new task, I'm like, right, I want to be the best at it. So I've been, yeah, rather than working on new music, I'm kind of like practicing bass. But I'm progressing.
So what kind of music are you listening now these days then to kind of get you motivated?
Okay, so obviously I want to try and be a great funk bass player. So I delve into that a little bit. It's too technical at the moment. So at the moment I'm playing a bit of Talking Heads because I really like those bass lines, and they're simple but still a little bit funky. Play some Chili's. Yeah, that's about it for the moment.
What made you pick up the bass?
So I used to play cello when I was at university, and then when I started composing music, I always seemed to start with thinking of a bass line in my head, and that's where it would always start. But it was frustrating though, because obviously I didn't play it, so I would crappily play it, you know, with on the keys. And then, you know, over the years I was just always like, oh, I really need to pick up the bass and blah blah, and I never got the opportunity to. And then when I finally got one, I decided it's the good time.
And you mentioned cello, and I read somewhere that you played the trumpet when you were younger.
Yeah.
So.
And trombone.
Trombone as well. So are there still any instruments on your wish list?
Not really, no, actually. I mean, ideally I would have started off with a chordal instrument because that would have helped my songwriting, you know, hugely. But now I just think, I just kind of like maybe should concentrate on singing, and obviously now I'm a bass playing. I don't play brass instruments much anymore, but I write all horn lines in my music still, so that was a good skill to have picked up early on. Right,
and in those early days, were those brass instruments then the main thing, or was your singing always kind of the focal point?
So I started playing horns because I was singing in like big jazz bands, and they only had like half the set was vocal tracks and then the other half was instrumental, so half of the time I was kind of like sat around not really doing anything. So my band leader was like, oh well, why don't you know, play a horn? And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll play trumpet. So I started playing trumpet, and then I found myself being more interested in the lower register lines, you know, the instruments. And he's like, well, maybe, you know, try crossing over to trombone. And it was great because I developed an embouchure for trumpet. It meant that when I swapped to trombone, I could actually play really high parts. But then I kind of, you know, left university and got out of the habit of playing. And it's a shame, really, because now I could have been, you know, playing it on stage as well, but I've got enough to do.
Did it affect your singing?
Which bit? Playing?
But playing those instruments?
No, not really. Okay. No. I think it kind of, I guess, singing helped a bit. So when I'm writing for horns, I sing all the lines in first. And so for me, horn lines are kind of like complementary to the vocal lines. But physically and, you know, as in like physiology, it didn't affect it in any way, no.
Do you remember the first song you wrote? I
do. It was really bad. But my siblings loved it.
Okay. Yeah, because, well, you mentioned writing, and so what kind of compelled you to write a song? What kind of motivated you?
It just felt like a natural thing to do, because when I, you know, from being very young, I always wanted to be a performer, and yeah, I don't actually know why I particularly wanted to write music. I guess when I was very young, you know, I was on my own quite a bit. My parents were quite strict, so, you know, when other kids were sort of playing, you know, outside and things, I was never really allowed to sort of like, you know, play outside on the street and things. So I guess they bought me instruments to learn, but the funny thing was, like, they never bought me any lessons. They just, like, they bought me like big keyboards, and they bought me a violin, and then they just left me to it. So, you know, that was just my way of entertaining myself. Because
I believe your biological father, he is a musician. So how much of that were you aware of growing up?
From my whole life, from the day I was born. Yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up with him, But like the first 2 years of my life, he toured around Europe, and when he was in the UK, my mother would take me around to his shows. So even though I was very young, I was still very aware of what was going on, and I think I just naturally soaked up, you know, the whole music environment.
Right, because I find it quite interesting that your parents were then quite strict. So how did your mother view you going into music?
Yeah, my mother was, she was a funny one. It was kind of like, yeah, you can go into music, but you need to have, you know, like a solid career option as a backup. And, you know, obviously from growing up, they always knew that I would be a performer, but the thing is, like, they didn't really instill any kind of discipline to work towards doing that. It was just kind of, I guess they sort of saw it as a hobby that I would magically then one day turn into a career, possibly. You know, but I spent a lot of time wasted on stupid career options, you know, and I went to university and I studied, like, you know, I did chemistry and then hairdressing, and, you know, and for me, it's kind of, it was just an absolute waste of time. I would have preferred for them to say, okay, if you want to do music, then this is how you do it, and you do it properly, and you put all your energy into it, rather than, you know. But
you say they knew you were going to be a performer. So how did you exhibit this when you were younger? Were you just singing or?
Yeah, always singing. If they had family gatherings, like, I'd always put on a little performance, or I'd just like perform for my younger siblings and my nieces and nephew. So yeah, I was just naturally always doing something musical. But at the same time, you know, when I first started performing in public, I was horrendously shy. And I think that's because I'd been in this enclosed environment, you know, the whole time. I hadn't sort of like developed the skills yet. So yeah, so that was quite a thing to overcome.
Was there a turning point then in performing live?
Yes. Because after I actually went to see a counsellor. And I was like, yeah, I did.
Okay, really?
I needed to, yeah. Because I was like, you know, this is something that I really want to do, but I don't understand why I get so scared, and I don't understand why I'm so nervous, which made it, you know, less enjoyable, obviously. Sure. And they were like, well, let's go through all the things it could be. And it turned out that, obviously, one was I was just inexperienced. Two, I had this strange fear of hearing my voice coming out of different PA systems for some weird reason. You know, I was like, oh no, so, you know, it was just pinpointing things, and then she just said to me, look, the main thing is make sure you're always prepared. You rehearse and you go onto stage prepared, and then everything will just naturally come once the music starts. And she was right.
So what is the feeling now then when you go on stage? do you have a certain way of preparing, or?
Yeah, I drink a lot of Red Bull. Terrible energy drinks, which I really need to get out of the habit of that, because it's terrible, and it's yeah, it's not healthy. But I guess mentally, I do need like some minutes to be sort of quiet. I don't particularly get nervous, but I have this really strange thing where about 40 minutes before the show, I'll get horrendously tired, and I'll literally want to go to sleep. And I think it's just like fluctuations in my adrenaline or something like that. So, you know, during those moments, I just kind of get ready, sit quietly, you know, and not focus, because I don't want to sound that contrived, but I need quiet. Yeah, I've had some band members who love talking, like, you know, intensively about all kinds of subjects before we go on stage, and I'm just like, I need these people out of here, because I can't, like, my brain can't take it. So yeah, just a little bit of quietness.
But so when was this turning point? When kind of in the timeline was this? Was this around the first album?
It was, yeah, actually. And I remember it was a particular gig. So I discovered an artist called Amanda Blank back then, and she was a bit sort of trashy, but also quite cool. She was like a female MC from San Francisco, I think. Okay. And I remember seeing a show that she also did in Hamburg, and I just really loved her ballsiness, you know, and she was like very upfront and sort of like powerful and cool and very confident. And I remember watching a little clip on YouTube just before I went on stage with the Mocambos for, like, you know, the very first time. And I was like, and then it clicked. It was just like, that's all I need to do. Just go out with that attitude and you'll be fine. And then since that day, I haven't worried about it.
That's good.
Yeah.
Very good. And then, well, I mentioned the album, Gizelle Smith and the Mighty Mocambos. But after that, I'm sure you've done a couple of things, but it kind of simmered down a little bit. So was this by design?
No, it was through a series of unfortunate events, I think you might say. So basically, when I left the Mighty Mocambos because we had differences in ambition, I guess. You know, it was really great and it was really fun, but at the time, most of those guys were working full time. And I obviously wanted to start building my career. So there was no, you know, disharmony or anything like that. We just had different views of what we wanted. So I left. Then my producer and I, who was actually my partner at the time, split up. So, you know, he was kind of my link to producing music as well. So when we split up, basically my music production stopped, you know. I spent a year or two sort of writing songs, but didn't really have the people around me to make them, you know, help them materialize. So still I have like, you know, 50 songs that are kind of half written, which I might one day sort of like go back to. Maybe.
So you didn't go back to them for the...
No. So that was that. Okay. And I guess spending so much energy and time writing things and then leaving it unfinished kind of put me in this bit of a downer, first of all. And then I guess, you know, I had to... living in London is hard as a musician. I had to work a lot. I had to move flats quite a lot, you know, and that kind of put me in a really, it took me totally away from my career, basically. So yeah, and then coming up to sort of like 3 years ago, I fell into, so my mother got sick. So I had to move back to London and I was caring for her for 18 months. Okay. And in that time, I fell into like a horrendous depression, which I didn't actually believe I'd ever get out of. So yeah, so that was kind of, because I think if I hadn't have fallen into that depression, I probably would have started writing again sooner, because you know, my producer and I sort of started working together again, and it was quite cool. And then everything stopped because I went back to Manchester, got this depression, and then when I came back to London one day for a gig, my producer was like, okay, you can't go back to Manchester because you're really, really sick. And so, I guess, as a focus, whilst I was dealing with, you know, mental health issues, we just started writing a load of songs. We just thought, let's see what happens. You know, focus on, give yourself an aim again, and I guess to reinstate a feeling of being worth something. So we started doing that, and yeah, we wrote a great album.